Chapter 25. The Queen's Message. I thought we were pretty famous before the interview, but I was wrong. It was only after we had become headline news that I found out what being famous was really like. Wherever he went, Tom, Michael and Josie and Amit and me were waved and smiled at and patted on the head and given thumbs up by lots of people we didn't know. People at the bus stop and on the streets would run up to us and say things like, "God bless you," and "We're all behind you, Amit," and "I just signed the petition. Parliament's going to listen to us. You'll see." Even Mr. Bannock, who owned the newsagents near the school bus stop and was famous for hating children, ran out whenever he saw us and gave us each a chocolate egg for free. And not just for a day, but for a whole week. But as exciting as it was to be famous and to be friends with the most famous refugee boy in the world, what happened a few days later was even more surprising. On Wednesday morning, just 6 days after we had done the interview, we arrived at school ready to play football, but couldn't find Amit anywhere in the playground. When the bell began to ring, we headed straight to class. But when we got to our classroom, he wasn't there either. Neither was Miss Hempsey. "He's probably just late," shrugged Josie as we sat down. But Amit was never ever late. I looked over at Mrs. Khan and wondered if I should ask her. She was busy getting the class to sit down, but she looked happier and couldn't stop smiling, even when she was telling Clarissa off for being late. After registration, Mrs. Khan said that Mrs. Bourneville was going to take first period today as she had something to do. Then she came over to me and Josie and Michael and Tom and told us to come with her. "Are we in trouble?" whispered Tom as we followed Mrs. Khan down the corridor. "But we haven't done anything." "Have we?" whispered Josie. I didn't see anything. I didn't say anything. Me and Michael just looked at each other. Mrs. Khan knocked on Mrs. Sanders' door and waited for a "come in" before she pushed it open. The first person we saw was Amit. He was perched on his chair, his face looking surprised and serious and happy all in one go. Sitting on one side of him was Miss Hempsey, whose cheeks were pinker than I've ever seen them, and on the other were two men. They each gave me a wide smile. For a moment I couldn't remember how I knew them, and then Tom gave a gasp. "It's the Queen's Guards!" he cried out, punching me on the arm. He was right. They really were the Queen's Guards, except they were dressed in suits and didn't look so giant because they weren't wearing their tall black hats. As we walked in, they stood up and gave us a salute. Josie squealed in delight, and Michael was so excited he shook hands with both of them at the same time. I looked over at Amit, who, on seeing that he knew the guards, was now smiling at them fully. Come in," said Mrs. Sanders, waving at us to our seats and peering over her glass at us. "Children, these gentlemen have a very special message to give us," said Mrs. Sanders. "We certainly do," said Lieutenant Kungu. "It gives me great pleasure to present you with this very special message from Her Majesty, the Queen." He took an envelope from the inside of his coat and held it up. "And seeing as how the greatest idea in the world was your idea, how about you open this?" he asked as he held the envelope out to me. It was large and square and cream and had the curliest writing on it that I'd ever saw. As I took it, everyone crowded round me to stare at it. I turned it over. On the back was a large blob of red candle wax. It looked like it had been spilt accidentally, but there was EIIR stamped in the middle of it, so it must have been done on purpose. "Go on," whispered Josie, and Amit and Michael and Tom nodded. I carefully peeled off the wax blob and pulled out the letter. The writing was so curly and scratchy, and I was so nervous that I couldn't read the words. Seeing me struggle, Mrs. Khan came and stood behind me. I gave her the letter so she could read it out loud instead. This is what it said. "Dearest children, Lieutenant Chris Taylor and Second Lieutenant Walter Kungu were so kind as to inform me of your brave, although slightly dangerous, actions undertaken on behalf of your refugee friend Amit. I have now also received the letter you had written to me on the subject beforehand. Thank you for the very colourful envelope and the lovely stamps. Purple is quite my favourite colour. I was very sorry to hear of Amit's plight. I have heard of many little boys and girls like him. Thanks to your brave actions, lots of people from all over the world are working together to try and locate his family. I know they will be all trying their very best, and I look forward to hearing of their safe arrival to the United Kingdom, or Queendom, as you put it so nicely soon. My lieutenants tell me that you had brought tea and biscuits and gifts in the hopes of sharing them with me. That was a lovely idea. I am unfortunately scheduled to go on a small tour across Britain this week, but when I get back in a fortnight's time, I should like nothing better than to invite you all to have tea with me at the palace. Until then, I must ask that you please do not go running after any more of my soldiers. It was awfully dangerous, and I am most relieved that you were not hurt. Any letter addressed to me will always reach me, and I do like to receive mail, especially one so beautifully decorated and written with such care. With my fondest best wishes, Elizabeth R., 92 years old. After Mrs. Khan had read it out loud for us, and Miss Hempsey had finished telling Amit what the letter said, we all sat in silence. I guess there are some things that even grown-ups don't have any words for, and a message for the Queen is one of them. Chapter 26. The Present. It's been 2 weeks since we were all in the newspapers and received the Queen's letter, and in lots of ways things feel just like they did before. Mum doesn't walk me to the bus stop anymore, and strangers have stopped staring at us with funny looks on their faces, and I'm still hoping to win first prize for my photosynthesis plant, even though Amit's plant is growing faster than everyone else's again. He's teaching me some words in Kurdish like grow more and grow up and I love you lots and I think it's working. And in lots of other ways, things aren't normal at all. Aunt Christina comes round much more often, and she buys me presents too. I think she likes us now, because we were in the newspapers. I still don't like her. Whenever she comes, I ignore her and make Uncle Lenny play Scrabble with me and Mum like he used to do. Mr. and Mrs. Rashid from the floor below have invited Mum and me for dinner this weekend, which means Mum might have a new best friend. After next week, I'll be going with Tom and Josie and Michael and Amit to Buckingham Palace to have tea with the Queen. Sometimes I get so excited thinking about it that I have to jump up and down just as high as I can until my insides feel calmer. I think they must know that things can never be the same again after you've had tea with an actual Queen. Mum asked me what I'd like to take as a present for the Queen, and I thought about it for 3 hours. In the end, I decided that as she really doesn't need anything, and I can't afford to buy her real diamonds or a ruby, I would buy her a pomegranate from the man with the royal heart. Because I think the next best thing to wearing lots of jewels must be to eat lots of little ones instead. The other thing that's changing is that I turned 10 today. When I woke up extra early this morning, I found the birthday card on the kitchen table. The birthday card is a very old card. It was the last one Dad gave to me before he died, and every year Mum puts it out so he can be there to greet me when I wake up, just like he used to when he was alive. It doesn't say much, just, to my pumpkin, happy birthday. Try not to grow up too fast. Love, Dad. Kiss. I'm glad Mum had to leave for work early, because seeing the card always makes me want to sit down and cry. So I did. And then I went to my room and played one of Dad's favourite songs on his old record player. That made me feel better too. Sometimes all you really need is somewhere to cry without anyone ever knowing. I didn't remind anyone it's my birthday because I wasn't having a party and I didn't have anything to take into class with me. Josie brings in a big cake on her birthday and Michael's mum always hands out goodie bags to everyone, but Mum doesn't have time to bake and goodie bags are expensive. That's why it's easy to pretend that I just don't have a birthday at all. I met Tom and Josie and Michael by the bus stop as usual, and when they didn't say anything about my birthday, I felt sad and glad at the same time. I was afraid Mrs. Khan might say something, but she didn't. My Uncle Lenny usually sends me something in the post, so I'd probably get home to find a card with some extra pocket money or chocolate in it like I did last year. If I did, that would be nice. Our afternoon break, Josie and Tom and Michael and Amit and me talked about what we were going to wear to Buckingham Palace next week. Josie's mum was going to buy her a new dress and a new pair of football trainers. Michael was wearing a suit with a bow tie. Tom said he had a purple suit his uncle had made him wear to a wedding in San Francisco, but which might not fit anymore. And Amit said his foster mum was going to buy him something at the weekend, and that he would also take his rucksack. "You can't take your rucksack with you," said Josie. "It's old and ripped and it's got a hole in the front pocket. The Queen might not let us inside the palace." "But important," said Amit, looking panicked. My dad gave me for birthday before war, and I carry from Syria, so next time I tell him it was seen by a queen. Oh, said Josie, looking sorry that she had said anything. Then you have to take it, I said. The queen will want to see it. Yeah, said Tom, and your dad will love it. Armit smiled and said, I know you to understand. The bell for last period began to ring, but as we all headed back to class, we met Miss Hempsey in the corridor outside. She was clasping her hands together and her eyes looked red. As soon as she saw us, she ran over and whispered something into Armit's ear, took him by hand and quickly led him away. Where's she taking him? Asked Josie, as Armit looked over his shoulder and a confused look on his face. None of us could think of an answer, so we made our way into class. After we'd all got out our spelling books and had spent 10 minutes learning the meaning and spelling of 3 new words, possession, depression and objection, there was a light knock on the door. We all looked round to see who it was. After a few seconds, Miss Hempsey's head popped round the door, and after giving Mrs. Khan a thumbs up, disappeared again. Mrs. Khan smiled and, clapping her hands, said, Right, everyone, close your books, please. I have a very important announcement to make. We all fell quiet and waited for an explanation about what was going on and where Armit was. Today is a very special day, said Mrs. Khan, and we have few very special guests to help us celebrate. Everyone turned round to see if there was anyone at the door, but there was no one there yet. Eyes to the front, please, ordered Mrs. Khan. Now, before our guests arrive, I want you all to promise me that you'll be on your very best behaviour. Everyone shouted, We promise, Mrs. Khan, wondering who the guests would be. Do you think it's the Queen? Whispered Josie. Maybe it's the Queen's guards again, whispered Tom. But they were both wrong, because it was my mum, carrying a cake with candles on it. And behind her was Mrs. Sanders and Armit's foster mum and Miss Hempsey and the woman who had been at the interview who Michael had said was Armit's caseworker and another woman we'd never seen before who was walking with her hand on Armit's shoulder. I could tell Armit's happy because he was smiling, but his eyes looked wet and a little red too, just like Miss Hempsey's had in the corridor. And within a few seconds the whole class was singing happy birthday to me just as loudly as they could. After Mum helped me blow out the candles, Armit and Miss Hempsey and the woman who still had her hand on his shoulder stood at the front of the class with Mrs. Khan. Quieten down, please, everyone, called out Mrs. Khan. We'll cut the cake in just a few minutes, but first I want everyone to say good afternoon to our extra special guest, Miss Duncan. The woman standing behind Armit stepped forward as everyone shouted out, Good afternoon, Miss Duncan. She was wearing a bright blue suit and had short grey hair and a green diamond ring. Now, Miss Duncan has come here today from very far away because she has some important news to share with us all, said Mrs. Khan. Over to you, Miss Duncan. Miss Duncan nodded and looked straight at me with a smile before looking round at everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm from the Home Office, which is a government department that controls who comes in and out of our country. Like the police, called out Dean. No, not like the police, smiled Mrs. Duncan. She had waited for more questions, but no one else said anything. Everyone was deathly silent now, and I could feel my whole chest beating so hard that it felt like someone was playing drums inside my tummy. Miss Duncan carried on. Today, I had the pleasure of bringing Armit some special news, and he was very kindly said that he would like to share it with you all. Armit? She held out a plain white envelope that had no address on it and offered it to him. But Armit didn't take it and whispered something to Miss Hempsey instead. Miss Hempsey frowned at first, but then laughing and crying all at once, gestured at me to come up. He would like his best friend to read it to everyone, she explained. For a moment I couldn't move. Then Josie gave me a kick under the table and made me stand up and slowly walk over to where Armit was standing. Miss Duncan waited until I was standing in front of her and holding out the envelope to me, said, A very happy birthday, Alexa, from all of us. Thanks to you and to Josie and Michael and Tom, of course, there have been thousands of people writing in and signing petitions and calling our offices just to ask how they could help Armit and lots of other refugee children like him. And because of that, well, here you go. Armit nodded and added, Happy birthday, best friend. I opened my mouth, but I think all my words must have disappeared and my brain had stopped working because I couldn't really think of any thoughts anymore. Armit tapped the envelope in my hand and said, You read it. For me. I tried to take the piece of paper out of the envelope, but there were so many eyes staring at me, and Armit's eyes looked at me that my fingers got nervous and started to shake. "Here, darling, let me help," whispered my mum, as she jumped up and quickly took out the folded piece of paper that lay inside. Opening it up, she held me close as we read it out together. It said, "Status, family investigation summary, Ahmet Sakal, age 9. Father, Mohammed Sakal, age 43. Profession, Professor of Engineering. Country of origin, Syria. Status, located, Calais refugee camp, France. Mother, Samira Sakal, age 45. Profession, journalist. Country of origin, Syria. Status, located, Menfa, Zurich, Turkey. Sister, Sira Sakal, age 3. Status, deceased, Med Crossing. HO outcome granted permanent asylum in the UK. Reunification of family imminent." I looked up at Mum and then at Ahmet and then back at Mum again. "What's Assas asylum mean?" My mum smiled, but her eyes were watery too. "It means they can come and live here, darling. Ahmet's mum and dad are coming to the UK. They've been found." I looked up at Ahmet, who was nodding excitedly. And then I looked up at Josie and Tom and Michael, who were all staring back at me with their mouths open. And then I looked at Mrs. Khan, who was saying a prayer, and Miss Hempsey, who was crying so much that she had grabbed Mrs. Sanders and was making her go red in the face. And suddenly Michael jumped up and shouted, "We did it!" And the whole class started cheering and whooping and jumping and clapping all at once. I know that afternoon was one of the best afternoons I would ever have, not because it was my birthday, but because it was an end to one of the best adventures a brand new 10-year-old could ever have, and the beginning of a whole set of new adventures that I bet even Tintin never had. And it was all thanks to a boy who came and sat at the back of the class and let me be his friend.